This is ICASTnews.com, live and direct from United Nations headquarters in New York City. And this is Bubbling Under and Bubbling Over. Paradoxical news, good news in a way, out of West Africa, where the WHO reports today that for the first time they have delivered the hoped-for trial drug that may control Ebola to Monrovia in Liberia. The paradoxically good news is Ebola new cases are diminishing. In fact, there were only 8 new cases in Liberia this week, meaning that it's going to be more difficult to test the samples. They want to test upwards of 10,000 volunteers. So far, GlaxoSmithKline has delivered to them 300 samples. What they're going to do is they're going to inoculate volunteers and an equal number of people inoculated with a placebo to see in the field if the drug is in fact effective. One of the hoped-for drugs coming out of America, ZMapp, has turned out to be a failure. That was the drug that was given to the victims of Ebola in Texas, and it turns out not to be able to be produced easily in large quantities, and its effectiveness is somewhat to be questioned. But right now, in West Africa, appears at least in one of the three beleaguered countries, the worst is coming to an end. It's not getting better. Thousands have still died, but there is some hope as the WHO is celebrating the delivery of a trial vaccine to be tried in the field there. In another part of Africa, in Nigeria, the situation continues to spiral downward or in less than a controlled fashion. This week, Boko Haram put out its own propaganda video showing themselves in front of a huge stash of weapons, saying that the claims that Amnesty International made, that we reported on last week, that Baga, that they had killed some couple thousand people, probably are kind of true, that they had slaughtered thousands of infidels. The exact number is unknown, and as we reported last week, it's less a question of discrimination against Africans in press coverage, that it's far away, it's not in a city, it's dangerous, and Paris is a world capital, which is one of the reasons it got so much attention. What we also know, in the midst of an ongoing campaign for the re-election or the election of a new man to replace Goodluck Jonathan as the president of Nigeria, is that Boko Haram seems to be really doing an effective job of destabilizing at least one part of the country. Remember this summer, the campaign for the Chibok girls, the 200 girls who had been captured and then said to be sold into slavery. Everyone was showing support for them. There were buttons, there was a hashtag in support and solidarity. I didn't notice the most prominent person who was in support, the First Lady of the United States, speaking up this summer. I didn't notice her saying anything or wearing a button. That's in large part because the failure to try and help the girls ended in disaster. Boko Haram says that they have been spirited out of the country, sold into slavery, and are now the sex slaves and enforced wives of a variety of Islamic warriors. The Nigerian government says that America has not done enough to back their efforts to rein things in. Well, it wasn't just the 200 girls. There were 185 people, mostly girls, kidnapped in December. And the United Nations has accused the Nigerian military of gross human rights violations. According to American legal order, if the UN accuses a foreign military of gross human rights violations, America can't give them any aid, even if it wanted to. It seems in Nigeria that there's a election going on. Boko Haram is disrupting things as they want to do. The Nigerian authorities say they don't need help, they don't need the United Nations, and they're not going to call off their election campaign. The United Nations this week was a place for the highest of high culture and the most popular of popular culture. Late in the week, one of the world's leading intellectuals, Henry Bernard Lévy, the French philosopher, Bernard-Henri Lévy, spoke to the United Nations about anti-Semitism. He said that it was simply a case of radical inhumanity, and he decried the rise in Europe and elsewhere in the world of a second strong wave of anti-Semitism. He said that it was being put forward by a new order of assassins. In a surprise move, the Saudi ambassador, Ambassador al-Mulani, got up and endorsed what he was saying. He said that the Saudis condemned all words leading to hatred, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia. Odd thing is that this was happening at the same time that to the south of the Saudi border with Yemen, Houthi rebels were deposing the president and the prime minister, demonstrating and chanting slogans: death to America, death to Israel, curses to the Jews, and victory to Islam. In the changing chaotic order that is the very troubled Horn of Africa, it may be that the rapprochement that has been showed between the Saudis and the Israelis may actually be taking some action. With a new government, with a new king in Saudi Arabia, it may be that he will be forced to recognize that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Their enemy is Iran. Iran is backing the rebels in Yemen. The enemy of their enemy is Israel. Odd bedfellows politics makes. And while we're on the subject of the death of the king in Saudi Arabia, there's been a great deal of talk and a great deal of reassurance that the new king, Salman, is going to follow the policies of his predecessor, that there is going to be loyalty and order and stability. This reporter remembers Salman extremely well. He fed the monster. He helped stoke the monster. He was the man who was collecting monies and distributing them to the Mujahideen, including to a Mujahideen who was a Saudi citizen, whose name was bin Laden. At some point, Salman was distributing $25 million a week to the Mujahideen who were fighting against Soviet boys in Afghanistan. If we want to trace back the monster that is contemporary radical terrorism being visited against Western peoples, it is to this action, fighting against the Soviets and supporting the Mujahideen in an anything-goes kind of campaign. Does this bode well for that fractious part of the world where the Saudis are increasingly facing off against the Persians, the Iranians? And the other side of the high drama, not Professor Lévy speaking at the UN, was popular culture. Popular culture, Emma Watson, who so many grew up watching as she turned into a young woman in the Harry Potter series. Emma Watson, who when she was announced as a special ambassador to UN Women this summer, managed to provoke such a reaction that it crashed all the computers for almost half a day because she is such a phenomenon. To all my students who grew up with the Harry Potter movies, she's a heroine and a celebrity of the greatest magnitude. She is now becoming an active spokesman for the He for She campaign, trying to get attention, men's attention for women and women's equality, sponsored by UN Women. She's a movie star. She said, "You might be thinking, who is this Harry Potter girl and what's she doing up on the stage at the UN?" It's a good question, and trust me, I've been asking that myself. I don't know if I'm qualified to be here. All I know is I care about this problem, meaning women's equal rights, and I want to make things better. Humility at the UN is a rare thing, and the attention she brings to the cause of UN Women has got to be a very good thing. This week brings two international forums into focus. One immediate, the gathering of the rich people throughout the world in Davos in Switzerland, and behind the scenes here at the UN, the work to get in September another set of millennial goals. Bill and Melinda Gates, through their foundation this week, have released a remarkable letter. Once a year they provide a letter saying how these people, entrepreneurs of the digital world who are giving their fortune away, who have established the single largest foundation in the world, what they set as their goals. It's a remarkable document. Anyone can look at it by going to the Gates website or just Googling Gates letter. What's specifically interesting is they're trying to lay down a bright line that they want the United Nations to follow. They're talking about specific, very specific goals: eradicating polio, eradicating or beginning to eradicate malaria, guinea worm, doing things to raise the survival of women-bearing children in Africa, finding ways to get Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, to feed itself. And in passing, they took quite a shot at the United Nations. They said, by having absolute no priorities, by endorsing everything, by having priorities on everything, they prioritize nothing. In other words, Bill Gates, one of the smartest men in the world, is saying to the United Nations, put some priorities on things. Don't just make broad consensuses and want to make everything better. Choose some targets and make the world a better place. And speaking of making the world a better place, the good people at the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, the people who in 1947, having many of them worked on the atomic bomb project and having second and third thoughts about what it did to the survival of mankind, the people who established the doomsday clock, have come out with their situation of the world ratings. They've established the doomsday clock. The closer the clock is to midnight, the more imperiled the world is, the closer it is to doom. Since 2007, the clock has been 8 or 10 minutes before midnight. Now it's been moved to 11:57. And the reasons are the inability of the world, especially the large powers, to do anything about the rise in world global average temperatures 2 degrees above what they were in the pre-industrial era, and the failure, the abject failure to follow through on reduction of nuclear weapons. What they pointed out particularly is, yes, the United States and the former states of the Soviet Union, that is Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Belarus, did contain and destroy a number of weapons. But both sides are busy modernizing their atomic weapon stockpiles, and many countries, including Iran, including Pakistan, including North Korea, and who knows which other countries, are busy becoming armed or about to be atomic armed powers regional superpowers. That's destabilizing, that's dangerous. And according to the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, we are closer to doom than we have been in a long time. For ICASTnews.com, live and direct from United Nations headquarters, for Bubbling Under and Bubbling Over in January 2015, with doom hanging over us, I'm Jonathan Sanders.